You're watching Canadian Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. From Toronto, Ontario, I'm Catherine Bullock. Assalamu alaikum and greetings of peace. Today, a conversation with Imam Irshad Osman about the rising tide of Islamophobia in his home country of Sri Lanka. But first, some news headlines. Ask your parents to get you vaccinated, says Trudeau. Montreal man buys 27 kilos of PEI potatoes for local food bank. Israel threatens to arrest new security guards at Jerusalem's Al-Aqsa Mosque. And Syrian regime officials sentenced to jail for murders, crimes against humanity. And now the details. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said that low vaccination rates amongst children threatens the healthcare system, especially with the highly contagious Omicron variant. Ask your parents to get you vaccinated, he said, directly addressing children in his regular briefing. As of January 1st, only 2% of children aged 5 to 12 had received 2 doses, with close to 46% having received a single dose. His statement comes as students in Ontario and Quebec are preparing a return to classrooms on Monday. Quebec resident Mac Watson bought a large shipment of excess potatoes from Prince Edward Island for Montrealers in need. The potatoes might have ended up in the landfill after a United States export ban prevented their sale. Watson paid $15,000 for 27,000 kilos of potatoes to donate to Montreal's Welcome Hall mission. The Welcome Hall will use the potatoes for their hot meal program that serves 1,200 meals each day, and their free grocery stores, which serve more than 2,500 people a week. Watson told local media sources he hopes his initiative will encourage other Canadians to help the local PEI farmers. Israeli authorities blocked the appointment of new Palestinian security guards at the Al-Aqsa compound in occupied East Jerusalem's Old City. Authorities threatened Palestine's Jerusalem Islamic Waqf with arrest if they refused to comply. The religious trust administers the Al-Aqsa compound and needs new guards. There have been no new guards appointed to oversee the sacred esplanade since 2017. The Waqf usually nominates a list of names of guards and sends it to Jordan's Ministry of Al-Qaf and Islamic Affairs for approval. Jordan acts as a custodian of the sacred compound as part of a joint agreement with Israel. In a landmark case on the crimes committed by the Syrian regime, a German court sentenced a former Syrian intelligence official to life in prison. Anwar Raslan was convicted of committing crimes against humanity and at least 27 murders, 25 cases of dangerous physical injury, as well as many cases of torture, sexual assault, and rape, while serving as the head of the investigation unit at Damascus's Al-Khatib prison between 2011 and 2012. Patrick Croker, a lawyer partnered with the European Centre for Constitutional and Human Rights, said that today was the first step and most difficult step in addressing crimes in Syria. That's it for the news. And now our conversation about rising tide of Islamophobia in Sri Lanka. There's a rising tide of Islamophobia in Sri Lanka. During the pandemic, there has been forced cremation of Muslims who have died. Even though Islamic law prohibits it, there's been an attempt to ban the niqab. We have with us today Imam Irshad Osman from Canadians for Sri Lankan Minorities to talk to us today about what Canadian Muslims from Sri Lanka in Canada are doing about this. Welcome to the show. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kathy. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's my pleasure to be on Muslim Network TV show.
It's our pleasure to have you to talk about this sad and difficult topic. Now, I mentioned about the forced cremations. We know that since the civil war in 2009, there's been a rising Buddhist nationalism in Sri Lanka, targeting Muslims. They're about 9% of the population, I believe. What are the Muslims of Sri Lankan origin in Canada feeling about what's going on?
It is actually painful, Dr. Kathy, because for many first-generation immigrants who are in Canada, Sri Lanka is still the home. Many have micro and extended families, relatives, and friends. They have businesses, they have lands, they also in engaging in social welfare projects, etc. So, in the aftermath of any riots, usually funds are raised to support the Sri Lankans back home. Also, video clips and messages are shared on social media to raise awareness. But the recent forced cremation you mentioned was a good example of how the community came together to raise awareness. However, this emotional reaction hasn't translated into sustainable advocacy efforts yet.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you about sustainable advocacy, but first let's just get a little brief glimpse of the Sri Lankan community. You mentioned many are first generation. What's the percentage of Sri Lankan Muslims in the Canadian Muslim population?
According to 2016 census, there are about 160,000 Sri Lankans in Canada. That includes all ethnic groups, the majority or the largest of them being the Tamils. So if we take about 5 to 10% of them are Muslims, it's around 15,000 individuals, close to around 3,000 families, spread across Canada. Majority of them are obviously in Ontario.
That's a very, very tiny proportion. That's a big weight to have on their shoulders to try to be dealing with advocacy for back home. Is the wider Muslim community involved?
Wider Muslim community, in fact, that when this was right after the Easter Sunday bombing and the aftermath of anti-Muslim riots, until that time, there weren't any advocacy or social justice organizations among the Canadian Sri Lankan Muslim community. The first one was the Canadian for Sri Lankan Minorities that I started with Brother Ayub Khan and with some other young activists from the Muslim community. Then came the Sri Lankan Muslim Expatriate Council. Then came Justice for All, started its own Sri Lankan task force. In addition to these, in addition to these organized advocacy groups, individual activists and journalists also highlight the issue on social and print media. But there are challenges, obviously, with regard to maintaining an advocacy and social justice in our radar throughout the period.
And the challenges are because the community here, the Sri Lankan community, is not used to advocacy in the social justice realm. Is that what you've been saying?
Yes, there are many reasons. Number one is that unlike the Tamil community who were persecuted and who migrated to Canada because of persecution, Muslim community here did not come because of persecution. So advocacy is not in their blood yet. And then also the second reason is there's a fear of not being able to go back to Sri Lanka or being targeted by the regime, including their families. And
it's
also,
a very real fear.
Yeah, and also the community is used to see tangible results through funding social services and humanitarian work. As I said, those are the organizations which exist among the Sri Lankan. So what happens downstream is more easier to handle than going upstream to fight the root causes of injustice for them. Well, and the other thing is that, yeah, go ahead.
I mean, fighting injustice is hard anywhere. It's always an uphill battle. The powers that be. You mentioned
Kathy, the word you used is very interesting. You said fighting. That is one of the way the advocacy is seen. It's as radical, revolutionary, and regime toppling work. So people don't want to get into politics.
Right. Now, you mentioned the Easter bombing. There may be amongst our audience people who are not sure what that is. Please just fill us in.
Yes, yeah. In April 2019, on Easter Sunday, there were 3 churches in Sri Lanka and 3 luxury hotels were targeted in a series of coordinated suicide bombings. The finger was pointed at Muslims. Nobody believed it. We were in denial. But later it became clear that an extremist Muslim splinter group carried out that attack. Now, in the aftermath of those attacks and the investigations, it is becoming apparent that there was a hidden hand who activated this attack using these young Muslims. In fact, the interesting part is that the hand is not from the Muslim side. So there's a lot of attempt to cover those findings of those investigations. We haven't seen the report coming out yet.
Oh dear. So you're talking about what they call a false flag operation, where somebody else conducts the attack but tries to place the blame on a different community.
Not really, because the Muslims carried out an attack, but they were funded and they were propped by forces other than the Muslims.
Oh dear. Mm-hmm. Well, then let's talk about the advocacy that you've been trying to do with your new organization. Where's your lobbying efforts directed, to Sri Lanka or Canada?
Actually, our lobbying efforts directed to Canada as well as the intergovernmental bodies like United Nations, Amnesty, etc. The reason is that it's not like we are a new organization, we are only working in Sri Lanka, in Canada, but there are other similar bodies, advocacy bodies are working across the Western nations. So we are trying to build network and work together to raise awareness and to pressurize the government, our own governments, to do something to stop this Islamophobic trend in Sri Lanka.
And the Canadian government, what are you asking of them?
Oh, for the Canadian government, we made a lot of asks during before COVID. We met with about 26 politicians, right? We asked the Canadian government to act on international, bilateral, and national levels. We asked them to advocate for an independent fact-finding mission and also make Canadian aid to Sri Lanka conditional upon Sri Lankan government upholding human rights, especially minority rights. We also asked them to take multilateral action through global bodies such as United Nations. On a bilateral level, we asked them to organize meetings with the Sri Lankan government to mitigate hate crimes and hate speech, especially online hate and its influence within policy and policing. And at the national level also, we asked all the Canadian politicians, whoever we met with, to raise awareness in the parliament on the trend of anti-minority rhetoric and hate crimes in Sri Lanka and the necessity of taking action. We asked them to raise awareness through their public platform and social media about what's going on in Sri Lanka.
And unfortunately, often on the big political stage, small countries don't get attention from politicians because there are geopolitical strategic interests at play. Are you finding the Canadian officials wanting to be advocates as you're asking?
That's an interesting question, and true that in the beginning when we started to meet with the politicians, again, when you're meeting with the politician, the voting power matters. So they want to know how big is this community for them to jump the bandwagon on. So in that sense, the Tamil community has done a lot of work. So we are re-strategizing our work to partner with Tamil community as well as other minority communities who came to Canada as persecuted minorities. So that's one thing. Also, we are trying to globally connect with other networks on how to learn from them. So this is a challenge, but I would like to say that some of the politicians were very, very interested. I remember I had a meeting with the Mayor John Tory. And in the first meeting, after booking the meeting, we went there, we started off saying Sri Lankan Muslims. He said, can you hold on? Who are Sri Lankan Muslims? I have met the Sri Lankan Tamils. I have met the Sinhalese who are Sri Lankan Muslims. We had to take about 10 minutes to explain him what is the community, what is our voter base, etc. Then he said in the end of the meeting, you have a duty to go and meet with all the councillors to let them know that there exists a Sri Lankan Muslim community who are facing these challenges.
Well, unfortunately we're about out of time almost, but in about 10 seconds, can you tell us what you'd like the audience who are watching to do?
The audience to think about and support in any form or shape anything about Sri Lanka, educate yourself and understand that this is a community who have been contributing to the country for very, very centuries. So they existed, there's a contributor there. But now Sri Lankan Muslims have become the common enemy after the Tamils were defeated. So we are facing the same challenge with the Tamil community faced. Although we are not in the stage of being expelled from the country like the Burmese Muslims, but still the challenge inside the country is very, very serious.
And I'm afraid we have to leave it there. Sorry to interrupt.
Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Kathy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You've been watching Canadian Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Stay tuned for the next episode. Stay safe and God bless.